Hello and welcome to AutoMoments. This is sort of a follow-up to our Time Warp test drive episode about the Continental Mark V. And I'm coming to you here from my 1972 AMC Ambassador, but I'm not actually driving anywhere because it's snowing outside. Anyways, I was really excited to see how many people enjoyed that Continental Mark V video, and a lot of work went into filming that and researching it and writing it and editing it, so it really means a lot that you guys enjoyed it so much. And even though it was our longest episode yet, there were still things that had to be cut out. So I've got your comments here, and it's probably a good thing I'm not driving anywhere since I have to read. But our first one comes from Darren. He says, do some in-depth on the creature comforts. And actually, that's one of the things I had to leave out is, I named a lot of the features the car had, but I didn't have time to go in-depth on them. So the first thing that I really wanted to talk about, and it's kind of silly, is the seatbelt chime. I mentioned that. Well, it turns out that actually was an option. That did not come standard on all the Marks. The regular base thing had just a buzzer that just bzzz, and you can tell it's actually a mechanism. It's not like a simulation or a recording or anything like that. If you listen closely up by the dash, you can hear the little bell plunger going ding. I thought that was really neat, and apparently Lincoln did not keep that very long. That was only a thing they had for a couple of years. One thing was the auto-dimming headlights, and you see there's a little sensitivity knob on there. That's kind of cool. You can adjust it. That wasn't exactly brand new technology then. Other cars had that in the past, but still, it's not something you saw in everyday vehicles, and so that's kind of neat. One thing that was new technology was the miles to empty readout, and that was actually a pretty big deal at the time, and of course later throughout the 1980s, stuff like that became more common. But in that car, yeah, it was the first American car to have any kind of miles to empty system, so that was pretty cool. The owner said whoever bought that car must have checked every single option on the, the order sheet, because it had CB radio and the 8-track system and all kinds of other stuff. It had sunroof and all that. So, that car was loaded, and it was really cool to drive something that had been optioned all the way out like that, and to see, this is what the best of the best was during that time period. Next question comes from Dank Timmy the Explosive Toaster. And actually, Timmy was one of several people who asked questions similar to this. Timmy said, if you have the facilities, it would be really funny to do an old Motor Week style handling, speed, and braking test. And I'm sorry, Timmy, I don't have access to a racetrack, but I agree that would be cool. But as I said in the video, the car is surprisingly responsive for how little horsepower it has. It does have a lot of torque, and if you actually measured it, I'm sure 0 to 60 would be over 10 seconds. Some of the stuff I read online said it was as much as 14 seconds or whatever. So on paper it's not fast, but maybe it's because of the car's size. It feels adequate in terms of power, and you probably wouldn't want too much more power, or it could make the car dangerous. And that, of course, is a factor of the handling. I'm both scared but intrigued to see what it would look like going through a cone slalom. There'd be a lot of lean and skid and scrub and noise, but it'd probably be fun to do once. As for braking, the car does have 4-wheel discs, which is pretty cool, and I don't know if this car was equipped, but Lincoln did have an early anti-lock braking system called SureTrack that Ford Motor Company had kind of pioneered. I didn't do any panic stops in that Mark V, so I can't tell you whether or not it had SureTrack, but that is a pretty cool feature. Next question, is the dashboard leather wrapped? No, the dash was all vinyl and fake wood and metal or whatever, but the seats were leather, and somebody in the comments were like, oh, look at those crappy vinyl seats. No, those seats were real leather, and they did feel very good. They are quite comfortable, and the leather itself was pretty well taken care of. Skippy Jones wants to know the backstory to the two-tone color scheme. And while I don't know a whole lot about it, I do know that they changed from year to year. So like a 77 Bill Blass and a 78 and a 79 were different colors and different materials on the inside, and the vinyl roof would be different or whatever. And that was true for all the designer series. Some of them changed more than others throughout the years. And if you look at the 1979 brochure, what it says about the Bill Blass edition is, the Bill Blass edition is the embodiment of the outdoor life. It has the all-American look of a yachting party on the 4th of July. So that's mostly marketing speak, I suppose, but see, there's a picture of it there. And Blass was definitely going with a nautical theme, just because of the whole anchor logo with the two B's inside of it. And, you know, blue and white are sort of aquatic colors and that sort of thing. It does beg the question, though, whenever you have special editions of cars that have, you know, branded designer names on them, you know, whether it's the LL Bean Subaru Outback or the Eddie Bauer Ford Explorer, whatever, you do wonder how much of it is just paying that company to slap their brand on it versus how much design work they actually did. And those are the kind of secrets that, you know, unless you interview somebody who worked at a car company, you know, the regular buyers will never know. 2-Bit Rasputin asks, how do people make out in bucket seats, let alone real captain's chairs? Isn't that the drawback of that new $100,000 suicide door Lincoln Continental? The stupid date-ruining center consoles, which are the curse of modern automotive design? Well, I don't know if he's actually asking for advice or if he's just complaining, but I mean, what he said is true. Center consoles do cut into your space and restrict any kind of movement, especially between two passengers. What he's referencing there is the new coach door Continental, which is a special edition, like stretched wheelbase with the rearward opening doors, and it is really nice and it does add extra room, but they do have a gigantic center console, even in the back seat, which is kind of a pain. But my advice is to limit any kind of roughhousing in old cars, just because, you know, these seats are only original once and you'd hate to damage something. Martin asks, how does the hideaway headlight work? Well, I'm not a mechanic, but my understanding from talking to owners is that it's a spring-loaded door mechanism and there's a vacuum system that actually holds it shut. So that way, if the vacuum system fails, the door's open and you can still use your headlights in an emergency. But of course, the problem is, as the car gets old and components start to go bad, the system will develop leaks, and so then when you park your car, your headlight doors slowly start to go back up until, you know, the vacuum system is turned back on when you start the car. So, like any other thing on an old car, it's really cool, but it just becomes one more thing to fix. And our next question is about that also. It asks, can you explain what happened to hideaway headlights? Well, it's kind of a long story. Prior to the 1980s, all cars sold in the United States were required to have sealed beam headlights, which limited you to several kind of predictable shapes, either, you know, round or square. What that meant for designers is if you wanted an aerodynamic or just a different looking front end, you had to hide those sealed beam headlights in some kind of mechanism, whether those were pop-ups or, you know, doors or something like that. And so they developed these systems to cover up the lights when they weren't in use. Then, as we mentioned in our Lincoln Mark VII video, and you should go watch if you haven't already, the government approved composite headlights, which could be unique to each car and have these, you know, plastic surrounds, and they were much more aerodynamic, and stylists loved it because you could do all kinds of designs that fit better with the language of the car. Composite lights sort of eliminated the aerodynamic reason for having hideaway lights, and then of course, to have any kind of opening mechanism requires extra equipment, which adds complexity and adds costs, and automakers are always looking to cut down on that kind of thing. Which is a shame, because I miss hideaway lights. I think they're cool, but I understand why they don't have them anymore. Quintanamore? I think that's it. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. He wants me to do a direct comparison between other land yachts of this era. For example, Cadillac, Chrysler, etc. Well, the two cars I've driven that most closely compare to the Mark V are a 1972 Cadillac Eldorado and a 1975 Imperial LeBaron. And of course, I made videos about both, and you can go watch them right now, or after you're done watching this, go watch them. Of course, since the Eldorado I drove was from 1972, it's a little bit different. It would have been competing with the Mark IV, not the Mark V. And of course, the Eldorado had a bigger engine, and the one I drove was a pre-catalytic converter car. So it's sort of an apples to oranges thing. Anyways, both cars had really soft handling and were big, heavy American luxury barges. But you could definitely tell in the Cadillac that it was front-wheel drive, that you were being pulled around, and that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, it's just different. Also, the fact that the Cadillac offered a convertible, whereas you could not get a convertible Lincoln Mark series unless you went with like a third-party conversion, and they do exist. That's kind of a coolness factor that there's a lot more Cadillac convertibles out there. One big thing that sticks out to me is that the Eldorado's interior was not nearly as nice. That Bill Blass Lincoln was really fancy inside, whereas the Eldorado I drove was kind of basic for a Cadillac. Now, you could get Eldorados that were optioned out with way more stuff. So, you know, once again, it's an apples to oranges kind of thing. Personally, I like the styling of both cars, but I like the Lincoln just a little bit better. The Bill Blast trim is super cool, and then, you know, the spare tire hump and all that stuff, I can't help it. I'm a sucker for that stuff. As for the Imperial I drove, it was a 4-door hardtop, so once again, not a direct comparison, although it did have great visibility, but the real strength of the Imperial were its seats. Oh my goodness. As I said in the video, the front seats just feel like a couch. It's so nice. And also, part of that was its handling. The Imperial's suspension feels a lot more locked down. Mopar guys will tell you that's because of its torsion bars, gives it a very flat, stable ride. I mean, it's not a sports car, but it does feel very comfortable going down the road. And so if I were to compare the three, I'd say the Cadillac had the best engine, the Imperial had the best handling, but the Lincoln by far has the best looks. And, you know, it was 3 different cars from 3 different model years driven at 3 different locations, so it's not the most scientific comparison, but that's just my opinion, and I still loved all 3 of them. Continuing the theme of comparison, Jonathan asks to do a comparison to the later model Mark VII and Mark VIII. Well, I've never driven a Mark VIII. I have driven a Mark VII, and it is amazing the difference between the Mark V and the Mark VII. Just how from the Mark V to the Mark VI to the Mark VII, so much changed. Obviously, the Mark VII's a lot smaller, and the ride is a lot stiffer. It's still not rock hard, but it's definitely not wallowy like the Mark V is. Acceleration-wise, the Mark VII, if you got the LSC with the hot engine and all that stuff, it was way faster than a Mark V. The interior of the Mark VII definitely has a cockpit feel going on with it. You could tell they're trying to make it sportier and compete with German cars. It really just is a huge amount of change from those model years. You kind of almost wonder why Lincoln didn't brand the Mark VII as something else, give it a different name. Because if you were a loyal customer bringing in your Mark V to trade it in for a Mark VII, you'd be very confused. Here's another comparison request. Watson wants me to compare it to the black label Lincoln Continental of today. The new Continental obviously is stiffer and faster and quieter and, you know, better in every measurable way, but if you like old cars, the Mark V just has that charm of being from a bygone era of automotive excess. The new Continental is a very good car, and Ford rightfully should be very proud of it. Material quality is excellent. I appreciate Lincoln for not going all out trying to build a sports sedan. This sort of quiet luxury thing they have going with the Continental, I think, is more like the cars of the 70s than any other automaker. I wish they had a modern Bill Blast. They don't, but in the Navigator, you can get a package called Yacht Club, which is sort of a modern Bill Blast, I guess, which is really cool. It is really fancy. We have a big question here from Jasper St. Kellenberg. He wants to know the difference between the production years in terms of horsepower, a list of all the options that you could get, or a link where you could find them, common problems with the Mark V, modifications you can do to the Mark V. Sorry, this is a bit of a cop-out, but I'm going to tell you, start on Wikipedia and then work your way over to lincolnmark5.com. And they have a ton of info. I mean, they've got build sheets, and they've got production totals, and they've got forums where you can talk to people and talk to owners and that kind of thing. I mean, these guys know these cars inside and out. And as for options list, I mean, you can just look in the brochures. You know, they've got specifications and options and standard equipment and optional equipment and all the colors for that year and that kind of thing. So, and you can find brochures on the web. LincolnMark5.com has, you know, scans of that kind of stuff. They also have photos of the really rare Ford 75th anniversary cookbook that you would get if you bought a Diamond Jubilee Mark V. So that's kind of a cool thing. Another good resource is the Lincoln and Continental Owners Club. And after the Mark V video came out, they actually sent me a copy of their club magazine, the Lincoln and Continental Comments, and it was really nice. They had tech tips and restoration articles and stories about road trips and the latest club meetups and that kind of thing. And it's not just limited to a particular time period. The club covers everything from the early days of Lincoln up until recent models. It's a very nice publication, and at the back they have a classified section where I actually found a 1979 Lincoln Continental Mark V Bill Blast edition, so that was pretty cool. And a big thanks from me to the club for helping me fact check some of the info in this video. As for modifications, I mean, there's Facebook owners groups for these cars, and you can go on there and you see pictures of guys who've lowered them or chopped them or put big wheels on them or whatever. Personally, I think the Mark V is gorgeous the way it is, and it would be a sin to destroy one modifying it. But it's not my right to tell other people what to do with their own personal vehicles. Following up on that, Tyler wants to know how many Mark Vs are out there and how many other designer versions are out there. Well, once again, you can look online and find a lot of that stuff. According to Automotive Mileposts, here are the 1979 production figures. What I found interesting is that they didn't have an equal number of each designer series. Some of them, I guess, were more popular than others, or they just built more of them. So that's kind of cool. Nicholas asks, are some of the aesthetic features, such as louvres behind the front wheels, actually functional? This one I actually had to ask a group of owners and I got mixed answers, but finally we figured it out, and yes, the vents are functional. They help with cooling of the engine bay. And so that's kind of neat, because a lot of times when you see vents on cars, you think of like the cheap stick-on vents you buy at the auto parts stores, and so you don't think of them as functional, but in this case they actually are. SB Tanker? Spub Tanker? Spadanker? I don't know. This guy wants to know, I know it'll be terrible, but what's its miles per gallon? I didn't measure it personally, but EPA ratings for the 400 engine were 10 city, 16 highway. And of course, that's the old system where they always overestimated everything. I did talk to an owner, and he said on the highway he gets about 13 miles to the gallon. Robert wants to know how many golf bags will fit in the trunk. Well, that's a classic luxury car question, isn't it? Well, according to the brochure, let's see here. The luggage capacity is 18.1 cubic feet, which is more than the modern Continental, but less than the Panther body town car. So if we assume that the average golf bag is 4 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, then you could fit about 4.5 bags. You'd just have to cut them into pieces. But realistically, with clubs and gear and spare tire and all that stuff, I doubt more than 3 bags would fit comfortably. And our last question comes from Yard Sale Dale, who asks, are you going to upgrade the engine since it's a dinosaur and you can beat a lot of emissions requirements? How about a TBI fuel system and maybe a turbo? Well, I don't know if there are any turbocharged Mark Vs out there, but if there are, send me a picture. I'd love to see it. More power is always more fun, but like I said, it's not really a performance car. Also, this car doesn't belong to me. I borrowed it to make that video, so I can't make any modifications to it. And from what the owner said, he seems pretty happy with it. He actually loves Mark V so much, he owns 2 of them. But I don't foresee him making any modifications anytime soon. And of course, I can't thank him enough for letting me drive his car for that video. And I can't thank you guys enough for watching. Obviously, there are a lot of fans out on the internet that love big Lincolns. And I think that's a great thing. Also, thanks for tuning in to this Ambassador vlog. I know we didn't talk at all about my Ambassador, but that's okay. Once the weather's nice, hopefully we'll go for another drive. But in the meantime, we're gonna have more videos on the way soon. And don't forget, all the videos I referenced during this vlog, you can go back into the archive and watch if you haven't seen them, or you can rewatch them if you've seen them already. That'd be great. And until next time, thanks for watching.